All right, welcome everybody. We're going to start. I'm Marni Stein, and I'm Chief Academic Officer and Provost at Western Governors University. And I'm here today with Peter Smith from the University of Maryland, where he is a professor of innovative practice and a senior advisor to the president. And Peter, I met you during the pandemic on the phone and then on Zoom, and I've been on many meetings with you since, so I feel like I know you, but this is our first time meeting face to face. So nice to meet you.
Sweet pleasure.
And thank you for being here today to talk about your book, Education Underground. So I don't know how many people here have read the book, but it's really wonderful because it focuses primarily on students and student stories as the center of not only our practice in higher education, but our practice of innovation in higher education. It's so refreshing to see that approach and that student-centered view as we're thinking about what's next. So the stories are really profound and deeply touching, and deal with everything from these incredible journeys through teenage pregnancy and through prison and through all sorts and manners of trauma, and in many cases, in all cases, really wind their way up to triumph. So they're incredibly powerful set of stories. What did you learn from the experience?
Well, this was one of the most significant learning journeys of my life because it was the pandemic, and as we all know, everything slowed down, and I don't know about all of you, we all experienced it a little differently, but the idea that we're used to moving so fast, and we're going past things, people in our lives, and we know up here that they are people in need or people at risk or whatever, and we know the data, but the pandemic slowed everything down, and you began to really think about. You think you could turn that off? There, great.
Sorry, I don't know.
Anyway, so what happened was that I was doing these interviews, and in the middle of it, I had this moment where I said, I can't write this book. And because I am pretty much exactly what I look like. I'm an icon of white privilege in what is, regrettably, still a racist society. And my story, I was flunking algebra in the 9th grade. My father's solution was to repeat the 9th grade at Andover. And then I went to Princeton, and then I went to Harvard. Not a bad save. You know, if you're in trouble, that's a pretty good save. And so I went to my wife and I said, I can't do this book because I don't have the right. And she said, interview yourself as to counterpoint, what it's like when you get the benefit of the doubt, when people pick you up when you fall down, when you are networked with privilege and power, where the assumptions are positive. Interview yourself. And I did, and it was hilarious because I had never, and I mean that in small h, because I had never, having talked to these 20 people, and it had gone from up here to down here because these stories, and I was in a slow motion world and insecurities were on all of our minds. And then to see all the different ways. Now, and so I learned some things. I've picked some doozy fights in my life, but I picked every one of them. And I've lost some of them, but I always got to choose. These people are losing fights every day they never asked for. And when I, my favorite story is I lost my seat in the United States Congress 30 years ago because the National Rifle Association considered a guy named Bernie Sanders to be the lesser of two evils. That's my footnote in political history. Happily, he got to go on to do what I think he was meant to do. It's not that I'm not going to take a position one way or the other. And I think I got to go back to doing what the good Lord or whoever puts you on this earth, put me on this earth to do, which is work with adults and try to invent new solutions. But it was for me, the other notion that I got, and the reason I'm so glad to be here today is I feel more passionate about what we are all collectively doing and trying to do as a part of a deeper social justice movement. This isn't just the right thing to do. We blame people who fail in college. The society does. They lacked this, they lacked that. We're ignoring their talent. We're ignoring their intelligence. We're ignoring their integrity. But we say it hurts them. Well, you know what? It hurts all of us. It hurts this society. And my metaphor in the book is I grew up in Vermont. If you learn this once and don't do it again, but the salt in the old days could get up under your car, and after a while it would corrode the metal and your bumpers would fall off. And my metaphor in the book is that I really think if we don't get operationally serious about learning outcomes that are respectful and validated and qualitative in a wide variety of modes and deliveries throughout life for all the people in this country with talent and intelligence, our bumpers are going to fall off one of these days.
One of the threads throughout the stories is that, these notions we have of persistence and success in higher education are really, we think of them as an individual sport. And if you don't persist or if you don't get to success, well, it's your fault as an individual, rather than thinking of what we really need in this country, which is to make persistence and success a team sport, and a sport that's played not just within individual institutions while you happen to be there, but across institutions, because so many of these students and so many of our learners today in this country traverse multiple institutions before they get their first credential of value, before they get their first job. But yet there is no persisting support across that journey. And there's so many places to fall in between the cracks and get stuck there. So talk about that to me. What do you imagine in the future where we have an educational system, a real system that is more about shared collective responsibility for these journeys rather than putting that all on the individual?
Wow. Well, first of all, consider the word persistence. It's like you climb in K2 in tennis sneakers? No. Is your life in danger? Do we really intend higher education to be something you survive? Our language is imbued with that. And language is important, because if you're on the outside looking in, the language that you hear that is being used means different things to you than it might mean to the people who are using it. My metaphor, and it doesn't quite work in the extreme, but my eldest son's an emergency room doctor. Well, what would happen if emergency rooms, you came in and they said, well, if you can get your temperature down to 101 and your blood pressure to 120/80, come on back and we'll work with you. But you're just a little too sick for us right now. Or, no, that's not what we would do, and we would not be happy with an emergency room that did that. So for me, and the other example, well, there are two, I call it the bootstrap fallacy, the notion that we lift ourselves by our own bootstraps. Well, first of all, self-levitation doesn't have a big history of success in the United States or any place else. It's nuts, but we all know where it came from, but it doesn't help us think about the future. And the other, which is my favorite, which some people really don't like, is why is it that we will give you Pell money if you want to learn Spanish, but we won't give you Pell money if you want to learn English as a second language? Is English less important than Spanish? Less valuable? Is knowing Spanish a negative? So to me, we have these practices, and one of the things Western governors does beautifully, which I hope some of the rest of us can emulate in different ways, is the notion of a concierge service, that you have somebody with you to undo these other things from day one, and they're not an academic advisor or a faculty member or this. They are there if you got a problem with a parking ticket, which probably doesn't happen at WGU that much, but it happens at community colleges all the time, or you've got a problem with financial aid or blah, 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 you got someone you can call, and they won't tell you who to talk to. They'll go talk to the person themselves. That's what these folks deserve. It's not a matter of need. Everybody, learning's hard enough. Yeah, and assessment of prior learning. I'm so old that I was on the founding board of CALE in 1971. So that's just pathetic, I know. But the fact of the matter, and that is when we assess prior learning, and again, you do it very well, the success rate goes up by 40% or so. I mean, it's just a huge number because you have respected what somebody brings with them through the door. And you're not saying, well, you didn't learn it here, so we got to learn it again. So those are some of the things.
I think that, so at WG we do, for every student has a longitudinal mentor, and the longitudinal piece of that is critical, right? Because they're with them at the start as they're setting that path, and they're helping them to understand the why, like what is the value this path is going to get you. And as you say, they're there as a clearinghouse if the student has a problem with almost anything that happens inside of their learning experience or at home or at the intersection. And that is like, that is a key part of our model and a really big part of our the success, I think, for our adult students and our students who are juggling work and family. I think the next generation of that is, wouldn't it be amazing if that longitudinal mentor extended across educational and work experiences? Yes. Because that's where we see so many of these people in your stories really falling into these catchment areas that they are very lucky to get out of in many cases, because they do not have the services to help them take that next step. And that's what I thought was really powerful about many of your students. I mean, what did you learn about this notion of mentorship? Why is it so important to these learners?
Well, you know, I think it's important to all of us. It's just that some of us take it for granted because it's around us and it's part of our lives. And these are people for whom it was not part of their lives. What was really interesting to me was, for all the different backgrounds and issues, the fact of the matter was that there were 4 or 5 things that were consistent across the multitude, or if not all, of the stories. And one of them was mentorship. One of them was finding someone who would give you the benefit of the doubt, finding someone who would pick you up when you fell down, finding some, just those kinds of things, and just having that be something that you could, you for the first time in your life, you could count on. And it strikes me, there's a fellow here who I interviewed in the book, and it's fascinating. His name is R.V. Faisal, and he's in one of the I think it's tomorrow on a panel, and he created something called SV Academy, and it's first degree this guy got. The first degree was his MBA. Right, first degree he got was his MBA. Really interesting guy, and he has created, to go to your point, what RV Academy does, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong. People who know me will tell you that I operate at about 10,000 feet, so I don't always get the actual details right. But marketing is the subject. They come in, and it's like a boot camp. It can be half-time for 6 weeks, full-time for 12 weeks, something like that. Or no, full-time for 6 weeks, half-time for 12 weeks. Then you get a job, and they set the job up for you. And your advisor, who has been with you during the boot camp, stays with you, and you get the job at 60% pay or some such. And then at the end of another 8 months or whatever it is, you're having job coaching and then if you finish, that's when you finish the program, is after the first 8 or 9 months of work. And then you get the full pay, and you get your degree or certificate from RV Academy. To tell me who, we could do that in all sorts of employment areas. It's not the only way, but I think the notion, how many times have we heard an employer say, listen, I can teach them the job skills. please help me with problem solving, analytical thinking, critical thinking, writing, teamwork, anti-discrimination or pro civil rights and DEI. I mean, I need people that know how to live in the workplace productively. And that's the part that we always said, that's somebody else's job. So I think you're right on the money. So I wanted to ask you, I don't think we share exactly similar backgrounds, but you have come out of a pretty positive place and by birth in your life. And I'm just really interested in how the hell you fell into this wonderful work you're doing at WGU and before. What brought you to it?
Well, I actually grew up in a very poor rural community, and I was very lucky myself to have parents who valued education and had the means to send me to school at Penn State when I graduated from high school. But most of my family did not go to school. I think that was my initial interest in the work that I'm doing and going to education was seeing how my cousins, my dozens and dozens of cousins, many of whom came from the exact same background I did as a kid, never finished high school or never went to college, and so that was a big part of where I came from. And then, as you know, I worked at a lot of different places. I've worked in education at Penn and Columbia, at UC Santa Barbara, at UT, University of Texas System, and across the great state of Texas. And I learned a lot from those experiences. But what really made me interested in WGU was simply the fact that, as you know, you have a couple of WGU students that you interviewed in your book. Mm-hmm. Rashawn Green was one mm-hmm. of them, who was ADHD, misdiagnosed across his educational experience, dropped out of high school, worked his way up through an alternative pathway to actually finish his degree at WGU, and what is going on here? That's like a secret room over there. Oh my gosh! Increasing access, yeah. Awesome, with flexibility, woohoo! That's Rashawn Green's story is so amazing, because here is this kid that nobody believed in. He would have never gotten into a traditional educational institution, certainly not a state R1, certainly not an Ivy League school. He just would have never, ever been considered. And even if he had gotten into a traditional on-ground campus, he would have never completed. Now, he is of the profile that is highly unlikely, working full-time. Oh, okay. It was, hi over there. Welcome. Welcome. Yes. So we're talking about Rashawn Green, who was interviewed in Peter's book, who went through quite a journey from dropping out of high school and then moving up through an alternative high school, and then he went into community college and he dropped out, and he just had one of these typical journeys of back and forth, success and failure, trying to get to his first credential of value, which he did. He ended up graduating from WGU, and he's now manager at Microsoft, has an incredible job, is making an incredible impact on the job. I've heard him speak. His story in your book is lovely. He is incredibly talented and resilient, a powerful contributor to his family and to his community. He would have never gained admission to most institutions, most four-year colleges, and even if he did, he worked full-time while he went to college, so he would have very likely not finished. I think less than 25% of students who work full-time while they're going to college will finish in 8 years, and that story is far more grim for Black and African American students, for students who do not speak English as their first language, for women who are caretakers in their family for children. Mm-hmm. And so So you asked me, like what brought me here. I found myself in terms of my own mission in higher education at the University of Pennsylvania, at Columbia, at the University of Texas, all amazing places doing amazing work, so don't get me wrong. But they really define their own success and their own quality based on the people that they keep out, not the outcomes of the people that they let in. And to me, after a while, that got old and empty. So coming to WGU has just been a joy, because we are really the opposite. We're not at all about who we let in, because we're open access. We're about the outcomes of those folks, not only the outcomes in terms of credential, but what happens next.
Let me just, first of all, do a small apology, because you and I do not share a similar background. And I'm sorry, I overstated it, and I apologize for that.
No.
Wow. I'd like to think I could have done the same thing, but we'll never know. In the ADHD thing, that was another moment. I am severely ADHD. Those of you who didn't know me when I was a teenager would not be surprised, or would be surprised, but people who have known me for a long time. And I self-diagnosed once, but I forgot. And so I was in Cal State Monterey Bay as the founding president, and I was about halfway through, and it wasn't going that well. And I won't get into the details, but it wasn't going that well. So I went to a counselor, and then I ended up with a doctor, a psychologist, and he had a thing called the test of variable attributes. And you take the test, and he comes in afterwards, and it's just perfect. I loved it. He says, how do you think you did? I said, oh, good. And he said, what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I'm president of that new university up on the former Ford Ord. And he kind of leans forward, and he said, how's it going? I said, not real well. That's one of the reasons I'm sitting here. But the fact of the matter is, and so I now take a small amount of medicine, and my world has gone from black and white, like skipping a stone, to a deep dive in high-def color. But I got the support I needed from my friend once it came to that. Rashawn, he just endured, and endured, and then he found this explanation. But it was, and the negatives for him were way worse. I mean, I asked the doctor, how the hell could I get into Princeton or get through Andover with ADHD? And he said, what'd you do for, other than that? And I didn't tell him some of the things I did other than that, but I ran long distance. And he said, that's how you did it, because that's endorphins and that's self-medication, and you didn't know what you were doing, but you were, but I had, the minute, it was never a penalty for me, even though I couldn't figure out what the hell was wrong and why I couldn't remember anything sometimes. And this guy's story, holy moly, it's just the difference between having a real support platform and not.
Right, and it is a perfect example of how in the moments when an institution caught him, he had some services, but the minute that it didn't work for him, he was left on his own.
That's right.
And it was only through the force of his will that he made it through. One of the other topics that is threaded through your book, Peter, is really this notion that we all have skills,
Mm-hmm.
right? And regardless of how we grow up, we have experiences and opportunities that develop who we are. And those skills are so critical. Skills-based education, the technology, and the sort of processes to assess those skills, to value those skills, and to stack them into greater and greater kind of capital in the workplace. So, and this is how I met you, because we were working on the Open Skills Network and really looking at these questions of how in the future we could become more of an ecosystem of earning and learning that is skills-based. Mm-hmm. So where do you think that is going into the future? I mean, based in these stories, it seems like you believe that is the future, that credentials will still exist, but that really the future might look very different in terms of how we value what a person knows and is able to, what they're able to do.
Well, yeah, first of all, I think one of the things that's interesting to me is we do still have a dominant brand. And one of the reasons I called the book Stories from the Education Underground is that all these programs exist. How many of you know that Goodwill has 50,000 students in high schools all over the country? You know, do we know that as a society? Do we count that as being okay and good or whatever? So they are still below the surface, and frankly, even it's less so, but WGU, UMGC, SNU, Phoenix, Purdue, you know, we sort of pop up from time to time. But I would tell you, when people cheat to get their kids into USC or sue Harvard and MIT, they're after a brand. They're not after an education. They're after a brand. And so, to me, what we have to understand is that may continue, but that is not going to be the dominant model. And I think what's going to confuse things more is there are going to be multiple models, lots of ways of getting things done. And I think now in terms of identifying cross-cutting success characteristics. So regardless of your model, it could be the RV Academy, or it could be Western Governors or UMGC. What are the 5 things we're going to do with and for learners that are going to result in their performance and future success, or reduced insecurity in their lives, whatever it is? What are those 5 things? And we can look for them regardless of the model. Are we being successful? So I think that's going to lead to a lot more what I call come and go learning. And I think there's going to be, I listened to the ASU presentation, I can't believe, Michael, this morning on Dreamforce, and what I was taken with, they've invented this thing, if any of you were in that presentation, for the sciences, but I think its application is way beyond the sciences, and I think it may be ending up more important in other areas because you're taking out the faculty member's interpretation. You're taking out, I am now a participant in the action of this 3-dimensional thing. It just blew my mind. We can teach history, we can teach critical thinking, oh my God, we can teach anything. And I think do it and not have a dogmatic approach to what is the right answer or what is the wrong answer, which is the other side of it. We fight it all the time. We're trying to be fair, to be open. So to me, there are going to be all sorts of examples. And the point is to try to understand what we believe success looks like. And one of the ways is, can we recognize the skills people have that they bring with them? And can we translate those into academic currency? Can we also translate those into employment currency? It's the same data. It's the same information, but maybe a little sort of different uses. So how do we, and we're working on it. I mean, all sorts of people working on it. And to me, and there's a thing I just heard they're doing in Vermont, because I was up in Vermont visiting my grandchildren, where they're now beginning to treat rural libraries as learning centers, as data centers, as places. So you think, I'm in New Mexico now. We have so much work to do on the reservations. I mean, my God, it's 70% of the kids in the Santa Fe school system are hot lunch free, hot lunch eligible. 70%. I mean, so the idea that we can have connectivity, doing that in different ways, but we're simply gonna have to figure out a way to meet people where they are. And to me, we can do that for the first time at scale. And I just say, let's not get trapped into one model, because I think there's gonna be a ton of them.
Well, so I'd be interested in your point of view on this, because meeting people where they are, and this is absolutely true in the stories in your book, means that we have a flexible, accessible approach to education. And that means online, hybrid. Maybe you don't take all 4 years of your undergraduate at once. Maybe you stack into that while you're working. But interestingly, at the beginning of COVID, I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting because we have all these traditional universities who are now forced to go online, which means they moved all of their classroom syllabus and other materials onto their Canvas or Blackboard site very quickly and try to figure out, how am I going to do this this year? And I was hopeful that would also mean that there would be an embracing of the fact that going online allowed for a flexibility for many learners and learner profiles that simply was not there if you had to drive up to the campus, possibly get a parking ticket, walk over the slippery ice to your first class, hopefully you didn't fall down, get into your class, rush out to go back to work or whatever, right? I thought that there would be this reckoning. Foolish me. But there really, it seems, has been, while there has been progress for sure, and while I think a lot of people have learned a lot of important lessons about how powerful this approach can be to flexibility, there's also been a little bit of a backlash that, hey, this didn't work so well, and we got to get back to normal, right? So what do you think? I mean, you've had tons of, are we moving, do we believe that higher education is moving to a future that is going to understand that the large majority of students they serve needs a more flexible option than a 4-year face-to-face degree?
Well, you haven't known me very long, but those people have, was characterized once as being occasionally wrong, but never in doubt. So with that in mind, I don't think they have a choice, but I also think there are going to be casualties, and I think there's going to be myriad numbers of playouts, new things, decline in some institutions. But the fact of the matter is that I've just finished Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. I'm telling you, she examines what holds our society together in this awful structure of people defined by gender and race and income, but the income usually is reflected by gender and race. It is, and to have a reviewer of my book equate it in even a small part to caste blew my mind. I do not confuse myself with Isabel Wilkerson. Let's just be really clear about that. But what we are fighting, the reason I started with the salt on your bumpers and your bumpers falling off, is that our work is about the future of this society as a place where freedom and equity mean something beyond something I did for you. No. It's there. You walk into it. It's there with you. And to me, a lot of the pushback, I think, it isn't intended to be racist or class-oriented or any of that at all, because that's much too conscious. But if you look at caste systems, there are defenses of the status quo that perpetuate that, and I think that's part of what we're experiencing.
I totally believe that.
So I'm all over it.
That's surely higher education is one of the biggest systemic drivers of the caste system.
And it's a shame in the sense that I'm not sure that's what anyone intended. It doesn't matter.
Right. So my question to you is, after all of these interviews and your long distinguished career, how do we dismantle that system?
Brick by brick. I mean, you can't. I hope there's some legislation. I think we're now seeing for the first time the notion that insecurities, housing, health, food, income hurt us all. They hurt the society. They don't just hurt the person. And then, gee, if you did figure out a way to give people some money, they'd spend it locally. Do you think that would be good for local community economies? I sort of think so. But enough of that. I'm not a politician. I'm a recovering politician. So, but I really think it's going to be brick by brick. And it isn't that there are bad people. We are caught in a wrong system that does bad things. But if you think about what the GI Bill spawned, I think in many ways, as much as we could understand it, the inequities were inadvertent. It wasn't like, let's go set up this thing so half the people who might be eligible can't use it. And it's a miracle, but it doesn't. So let's not waste time trying to make it bad or less good or this or that. Let's just find out where the inequities are. I think it's more than just education policy, but we're educators and trying to create new options. Let's just brick by brick go at it. And to me, I've already seen at this meeting things that I didn't even like Dreamforce or Dreamscape, whatever it was this morning. I had never heard of it. So there are going to be ways. And I think weekend colleges, I mean, there are all sorts of ways that we can meet people's needs as long as we understand that we got to hear them first and then meet the need, not dream up the solution and then go look for the learners. But I don't know if that helps. But
Yeah.
we aren't going to wave our wand. At the same time, it's a struggle of joy. Because every one of us has had that when it works, and you shake someone's hand when they come and get a certificate, or they call you up and say, I remember it was your boss talking about somebody who had gotten a new job and got a call. The mentor got a call from the person, I got a new job. First person she called was her mentor at WGU. Oh my God. That's just a wonderful, obviously I've never forgotten it.
Yeah.
So we just need to be at it. And, I've had my ups and my downs. I started the college in Vermont, never got another job in Vermont. That's fine. Happily, I found some other places to work. It doesn't always work out great, but as long as we're headed in the right direction, brick by brick.
Do you think that the 4-year degree is a brick? I mean, do you think the 4-year degree, like when I was just reading through the stories, one of the things that really struck me is, wow, part of the problem is we put this big mountain or Duplo block or whatever you want to call, choose your metaphor, in front of people before they get that first credential of value. And that's like a big chunk of time, and it's never 4 years anywhere. It rarely is. It's usually 5 or 6 or 7. Is that one of the first bricks that we have to think about?
Yes, but I think what will happen is you won't see a replacement. You will see an alternative path. And we talk about stackable credentials. We talk about credential as you go, which is another emerging national effort. And I think so. It's what's going to be, I think, hard about it. And I experienced this when I started the Community College of Vermont in 1971. We had no campus and no permanent faculty. 1971, and we assessed prior learning. Well, that was not acceptable to the academic hierarchy. So I had some pretty rough times, personally and professionally. But the point of the matter is, and I couldn't say what the ultimate success story would look like because I didn't know for sure. Yes, the associate's degree was, and then we created a baccalaureate degree, but most people, what we finally started polling was, did you get what you came for? They said, that's not scientifically, relevant. You got to have more of a structure to your research. And I said, yeah, right. We were not particularly research oriented at that point. But at the heart of it is, did you get what you came for? And does that go again and again? And I think we'll see alternative paths, different ways of accumulating. And what we need to be able to have is for colleges and employers to be, and this is my thing, transparent about what they'll do with that information. And say we've got the common credential, whatever the heck that would look like. I don't want to try to get people to agree, because I just don't know when that day would come. But if I can get everybody to be transparent about what they will do, then the worker can decide where they want to go and how they want to relate.
I think that's really important, because I think for so many of these learners, I know learners that I grew up with, many of the learners in your stories, they know they need something. They've been told they need a degree, but I'm not sure they 100% understand what they're coming for. And I know that in many cases, they certainly don't understand what they got when they got that degree beyond the actual diploma. And so I think many of the things you talk about, whether it's the mentor as guide, or whether it is some way of surfacing incremental value of what students are learning on the way to degree, and value in terms of what's this worth in the zip code where I live or where I want to live in terms of employment. Like that level of transparency helps someone really understand and answer your question, which is, yes, I did get what I came for, which is job security, which is a social and economic ladder to basically transforming my life or the life of my family. And I think so many times, and this was clear in many of your stories, people are cruising through these educational experiences thinking it's going to end up in some kind of value, but they really couldn't tell what.
Amen, sister. It's really, and I tell the story about, so I'm at Princeton and I'm a sophomore and I'm pretty much of a wise guy, and I'm in a small class, and there's like 8 people, and there's no place to run, no place to hide, and I hadn't done my homework. So this guy, David Flaherty, changed my life, throws me out of class, says, don't go away. And at the end of the class, he comes out, and probably this wouldn't be allowed, and he grabs me by the lapels and puts me up against the wall and says, don't you ever waste my time again. You're smart. Don't ever waste my time again. And I, obviously I've never forgotten it. I went back to my room and he said, don't waste my time. He thinks I got something. That wasn't a history lesson. What kind of a lesson? It stayed with me, and I began to just say, okay, Smith, get with it here, buddy. This guy thinks you've got something. And the point is that should be happening. You shouldn't have to pay a lot of money for that kind of caring. And in another situation, that would have been exactly the wrong thing to do. In my case, it was probably exactly the right thing to do. But the equivalent, to me, it is, and then we're going to see a lot of different paths. That's why I talk about success characteristics that are larger than model because of, or mode of delivery, because that's, and you know, people also should be allowed to change their mind. I mean, you get to a certain point and all the things you learned in the Army as a supply chain manager, some of that may relate to being a real estate agent or whatever. I just made that up, by the way, so don't go to the data bank. But the point is, there are these deeper skills that translate, and we deny the translation, the way we're structured. So, yeah, I think it'll take a while, but I think first we'll see parallel paths that have an equal amount of validity, and it's employers we're going to have to advocate, and the government. I mean, we can double Pell, but why don't we make it a lifelong learning account based on your last year's taxes and make it income sensitive?
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
and why don't we encourage then systems to support that lifelong journey? I think that's the future of a higher education system,
Amen.
Which we don't really have
Amen.
a higher education system.
Amen.
Right.
I don't know. I think we're about to run out of time.
Are we? Yeah. I just wanted. I was wondering the same thing. If folks have questions for Peter, if you've read his book or you have questions about any of the stories, yes.
Peter, wonderful book.
Oh, thank you.
So if you look at the context, if you look at the Model Act, if you look at the GI Bill, which you mentioned, so they both came out of points where there was something wrong. There was tragedy and it was converted for the good of education.
Yes.
Today, through your book and others, We've looked at history that says there is a change that is occurring. So if we were to sort of take that lesson with the past, where should we be going?
Wow, I hadn't gotten that far in the analogy, but you're dead right. And I've been thinking of the opportunity. It's like with the notion of caste. I kept looking for something that was larger than race and income, but included them, and sectionality in the society. And then and what's interesting, how true it is that there have been books on caste society in America for the last 50 years. And I never saw or heard about one of them. But today, boom. So I think you're right, and I think there may be a greater opportunity to make tremendous progress. I really think one of the controversial things will be money. And we know that Pell Grants are, and loans, but I'm not a loan guy, are traditional institutions depend on them enormously. It doesn't strike me that, so if I wanted to use my lifelong learning account, or I increased the tax incentives for businesses and employers to do it because it's good for them to do. They're not doing it for the worker alone, they're doing it for them. But I could still spend it at a traditional institution if I wanted to. I really think, but it would decrease the magnetism. You know, the only way I get financial aid is to go there. So it would be very controversial and very difficult. But I think money, supporting, if we want people to follow alternative paths that make sense to them, being able on an income adjusted, fair basis to do that, I don't see another way. I don't see a more important starting point than that. And anyway, thank you for the question. At the risk of being whatever, my books are down in the bookstore, and I'm doing a signing tomorrow at 2. But you've just given me something to really, I think, listening to him, I think I may have understated what the opportunity is now in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it's definitely
Huge.
huge.
Thank you.
How do you create the political will to execute on something like that when there's so many people who want that status quo?
I may be the wrong guy to talk to about creating political will, because I created a huge amount of political won't when I was in the Congress. But I think, especially with the divisions in the country today, there's no, you can't, I mean, and I can be a little self-righteous about this. I knew I might lose, but I also knew I had to look myself in the mirror every morning when I shaved, because I still shave every day, sorta. And I had to like the guy I was looking at. And that's what happened with me in AK-47s. And I think this is like that. And I really admire the new bill that's been brought, the infrastructure bill, because it gets at so many of the insecurities. And sometimes we may lose the next 2 or 3, God forbid. But people gotta know what you're willing to fight for. And I think, frankly, coming out of the pandemic, to go back to your point, it could be a huge winner if they can figure out a way to get it done and people begin to really see, and that will help them come to college. I mean, if you remove these other kinds of insecurities, childcare, you name it, then I can do things that I couldn't do before. But I may be the wrong coach on political will.
Yes.
Question, non-traditional learners, are there any longitudinal studies to show their success and to help? The employer is a big part of the equation. If the employer at the investment bank is demanding the Ivy League degree, they're driving the economic system. So what research, what studies around that? Are we making progress with employers?
I'd go, you may know different and probably better, but Tony Carnevale and the folks at the Georgetown Center for Education and the Economy, or Education and Work, or whatever it is, I think they've done some really interesting stuff. Number one, they figured out that between 70 and 85% of what people use at work every day and know that makes them successful was not learned in a college classroom. And there's research going back. Alan Tuff, a Canadian researcher, in the 60s did something called the Adults Learning Projects. And that's 700 hours a year. The median adult, 700 hours a year learning discrete things with a beginning and an end. So there's all this, that's one. And I really think just, the other thing, and this is, I've read, and now this is where it's a good thing I wasn't a researcher, because could have gotten it a little wrong, but that after 15 years, they're showing that the income lines merge between people, the majority of people from the top branded colleges and everybody else with the same degree. That the big advantage is right out of the gates, which is why RV Academy was started, because he wanted to figure out how to do something for people like him who wanted to be in marketing but didn't go to Harvard or Stanford. And so I think there's it's coming, but to me there's Tony Carnevale's team at the Georgetown Center, and if you emailed them, they're really cool, and if you emailed them, if they didn't have an answer, they tell you where you could get one. But that's what I remember, is that the two lines merge in a majority of cases after 15 to 17 years. The real advantage of the Ivy League and the land grant, the big land grants, and so on and so forth, is the first 10 years.
I think then the real question becomes, like, again, back to the primacy of the degree, is how long does that last? And
Yeah.
we are seeing anecdotal stories about multiple different big, mostly tech firms, but also we've got a lot of hospitality firms, as well as places like Home Depot announcing that they're going to skills-based hiring. Is that true? To what extent that is true? Is that going to continue? That's very difficult. There is all kinds of capabilities a company needs to have to do skills-based hiring. And juxtapose the friction in that shift to the fact that those students out there, which are fast becoming the majority, who work full-time while they're going toward their degree, are having a very hard time getting that degree because of the way degrees are structured. That is, to me, the systemic inequality that we're really battling against, especially in a country that's been college for all for decades. Right? And it's not just political will that has to shift, it's everybody's will, every parent, every kid, every community that was like, it's college, right? And so is it college? And what does that college look like in a world where hiring practice may be in shift? It's a very interesting thing to think about.